Well, good afternoon and welcome to our latest New Mexico DELT, stands for New Mexico Distance Education and Learning Technology. And this is our March student engagement webinar. We typically do these the second Friday of every month. Any state of New Mexico ABE teacher is welcome to join us and participate. My name is Cash Clifton and I'll be presenting the webinar today. And I am a person who wears several hats. I am a Delton Master Teacher. We provide technology and distance education support to ABE programs throughout the state. I'm also the UNM Foundational Math Coordinator, and I am also an instructor at CNM, the Central New Mexico Community College, located here in the Albuquerque area. My email is right there. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or comments about this webinar or anything else that New Mexico DELT does. You can find us on the web at www.nmdelt.org. There we have lots of resources available to you. We have Plato on demand training. Any New Mexico ABE teacher does get access to the Plato learning software. And then we have a clearinghouse of resources that are free that you might check out for your students. We have those separated by discipline. We can also give you access to Google for Education. It gives you a learning management system through Google Classroom. You can also access that through our website. I'd also like to encourage you to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/nmdelt. That is where we keep you up to date on the latest things that are happening with New Mexico DELT as we plan for conferences and as we discover new resources on the web. We're always discovering new things. We are always updating our website, so be sure to check in with us regularly. So today we're talking about motivation theory. The idea here is, how do we get students motivated? And I titled it, "It's not what you say, it's how you say it." What the focus of today is on is, how can you communicate with your students well, communicate high expectations, maintain good control of your classroom, while still doing it in a positive way, in a manner that's going to encourage the student to succeed. So today is about very, very carefully choosing your words when interacting with a student. So what inspires you to motivate students? I don't think a lot of teachers are in it for the money. That's been my experience anyway. I think we're here for a lot of reasons, and usually it's a love of teaching. So I just want to share a quick story. We've recently revamped how we do mathematics at the lower level here at UNM, and I was speaking with a student the other day who had years and years of negative experiences with math, and the student was telling me that the negative experiences with math go all the way back to grade school. Followed this student from grade school into middle school, into high school, and then into an ABE program. The student actually was successful in passing their high school equivalency exam and is now in college, but here at the university level is still very, very much struggling with math. My conversation with the student was happening right before we were about to take a test in class, and the student said to me, he said, this is such a different experience because this is the first time that I can remember that I'm going into a math test and I feel confident. That really struck a chord with me, because I think sometimes with math it is about confidence. It's not so much that students can't learn or that students don't want to learn. It's that students aren't confident they can learn. They aren't confident they can succeed. Be that however they want to succeed. And as teachers, our job, in my opinion, is not just to deliver the content. It's to deliver the content in a way that inspires a student to learn more. It inspires a student to believe in themselves. It inspires a student to try to strive to be more, and that is the spirit of our webinar today. So I have a challenge for you. Let's see, I don't know why my clicks are not bringing up the next bullet point. Please bear with me here for a minute. There we go. So the challenge I'd like to propose to you is to try to start thinking of discipline problems differently. I think a lot of discipline problems in the classroom turn into a bit of a power struggle between the teacher and the student. And, I think generally in situations, the teacher wins. But instead of thinking of it like a struggle, instead of thinking of it as you have a bad student or the student's bad behaviors, try to think of it like the student is resisting change, be that change in their life or change in the classroom. Human beings tend to like to get in a rut and stay in it. Human beings like to look for patterns. Human beings like stability. They like predictability. And change is scary because change is often about getting those people out of that pattern. And so the part of change that's so scary, you can group that into four basic categories. A lot of people believe they can't change. Think of that from the context of your ABE student. Maybe they've had lots and lots of teachers tell them that they're not good at school. Maybe they've had family members tell them they're not good at school. Maybe they've had peers tell them they're not good at school. Maybe their own children have told them they're not good at school. And, I think if somebody hears that negativity enough, they're going to start to believe it. And they're going to believe that they can't change, that they can't be successful in an academic setting. The next basic category that makes change scary is there's a lot of people who don't want to change. Maybe the student doesn't see the value in the HSE. Maybe the student doesn't see a value in school. If they don't see the value of what they're doing, if they don't see a reason for doing this, maybe they just don't want to change. Maybe continue the status quo. The status quo may not be working for the student. It may not be functioning effectively for the student, but at least it's comfortable and familiar. A lot of times people don't know what to change. This is probably the biggest one I see in the HSE classroom. When people don't know what to change, maybe they want to study, but they don't know how to study. Maybe they aren't even aware that they need to study more. Maybe they may be at a place where they know they want the knowledge. They know they want the degree to get them to a better job, or the certificate to get them to a better job, but they don't know what to do to get there. And a lot of times people don't know how to change. Maybe they don't know what is within themselves. Maybe the person thinks that their poor study habits are an integrated part of them. It's not actually a part of who that person is. It's a behavior of that person. And behaviors can be changed. Sometimes as a teacher, you just have to show the student how to make those changes. So what is change in adult basic education? It's making new choices. It's changing your behaviors. It's changing study habits. And in some cases, it may not be changing study habits, it may be about creating study habits, about creating a study plan. I always use study plans in my classrooms, and I sit down with a student, or sometimes I email the student if they're a little more tech savvy, and I say, hey, I noticed you're not spending a lot of time in Play-Doh. One thing I think you could do to be successful in Play-Doh is choose 5 days a week and work at least an hour a day for each of those 5 days a week. Sometimes the students think that's absolutely absurd, that I'm asking way too much. And if they do, the best I can do is encourage them to do that and say, hey, this is where I'm giving you a roadmap to success. What you do with it is your choice. That's true for the student and the teacher. Maybe it's learning new information. Maybe it's learning basic math skills, learning to master order of operations. Maybe it's gaining basic reading skills. Maybe it's just learning the language of English. Maybe it is learning to make a cohesive argument, to display critical thinking. Maybe it's associated with new peer groups. You can't always assume that a student's friends and family value education. If their friends and family don't value education, that's definitely going to be a barrier to that student's success. It's not going to keep them from succeeding, but that's going to be a little bit of a problem. So sometimes it's about finding a group of people to hang out with. Now, do I tell students to stop hanging out with their family? No, absolutely not. I think family is a good thing, where the families are healthy. But oftentimes I will tell students, hey, maybe you should think about who you're hanging out with. Maybe making a new choice and a behavior change is succeeding in an educational setting. Perhaps the student has years and years of failure, and maybe they quit even trying to succeed. So just going in with that attitude of wanting to succeed may be something very, very different to that student. I plan to ask participants to type anything else they can think of in the comments box. Jamie, do we have any participants in a way that we can see them?
We actually don't.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on with this. I realize people may be listening. We just don't have you logged in a way that you can communicate with us. Again, if you do want to give questions or comments, please email me at clifton4@cnm.edu. I will respond to you after the webinar.
And if you are watching live right now, you can also email questions to me, jamie@nmdelt.org, and I will get them right away and I will relay them to Cash.
Thank you so much. And again, that's jamie@nmdelt.org. By the way, if you are a New Mexico ABE teacher, you can get an access on the NMDelt domain. You fill out a request for that via our webpage at www.nmdelt.org. So think for a second with me. Think of a student that has differing levels of motivation from day to day. We've probably all seen this at some point to various extents. Maybe the student is motivated and ready to work on Monday. They come in Monday morning and they are gung-ho. They're ready to go. I am going to make this my top priority. I have a plan to study. I know I can succeed at this, and the student is very, very positive. By Wednesday, maybe the student's apathetic and lethargic. Maybe they just don't really care about this class so much. Maybe they don't have the energy that they displayed on Monday. By Friday, they've completely given up. By Friday, I can't do this. I'm not going to succeed. I'm not going to try. But then they come back the next Monday ready to work again. Think about that for a second. I imagine you've seen some students that do this. And the question that I want to propose is, why do you think this happens? And it can happen a lot of different ways. Maybe the student's very motivated on Monday. Maybe they've given up on Wednesday, but they've got their motivation back on Friday. There's a whole lot of different sequences this kind of thing can follow. Well, I don't have an answer for exactly why this happens with students. I think it can happen for a lot of different reasons. I do have a model to share with you, and this is called the trans-theoretical model. This is actually from substance abuse addiction is where this model originated. And it's the idea that change happens in stages. Change does not happen at once, and there are stages that people go through in the process of changing. So the first stage is considered pre-contemplation. This is where a student is not ready to change. They are not ready to have any new behaviors. They are not ready to do anything different. This may be the student that wants to show up, sit in the back of your class, sit down and do a small art project rather than listening to you and then get up and leave when the time is over. They're not ready to listen to you. They are not ready for new knowledge. They are not even ready to be there. The next stage is contemplation. That's where a student's thinking about changing. That student may still come into your classroom, sit in the back, want to do their art projects and ignore you the whole time, but maybe they're thinking about changing. Maybe they're even starting to think a little bit about what they want to change, which is what leads them into preparation. That's where the student is actually ready to change. Now, the thing about contemplation is they're considering the change. They're not sure if they want to do it or not. They're just considering it as an option. Preparation is more where the student decides that they do want to change something. The thing is, though, in preparation, they're ready to make the change. They may have committed in their head to what they want to change, but they're not actually changing yet. They've just decided that they want to change. And the thing is, this is not a linear progression. A student may come to you one day in pre-contemplation, They may not be ready to change. They may come to you the next day prepared to change. They want to change, but they're not doing anything yet. The next time you see them, they might be back in pre-contemplations. People go back and forth through these. So if we're in preparation, that's where the student is ready to change, they're prepared to change. That then leads to action. That's where the student actually does something to change. And this preparation and action are really where you can do the most work with students. If a student is in action, this is where you want to start giving them ideas of what they can do to change. This is where you start saying, hey, why don't you go to tutoring? Hey, I would like to see you work in Play-Doh 1 hour a day, 5 days a week. This is where you may tell the student, I want to see you attend class 95% of the time throughout the semester, or whatever period of time your classes run for. And finally, there's maintenance. Maintenance is where a student is preserving their change. They've decided what to change, they've taken action to make the change, and then maintenance is where they're just continuing to make positive choices. And that can become a very difficult stage. Sometimes students can get a little bit of a rush from making changes and being successful. Then when they're consistently being successful, sort of the novelty of the situation wears off. So this is where you really want to be a cheerleader when the student's in maintenance. Tell the student, hey, you can do this. Look at how far you've come. Look at how far you're going. Look at what all you can accomplish if you continue to make these positive choices. And again, the students can jump back and forth between any of those stages. Termination is where the students create a new habit. Maybe they're just in the habit of studying every single night now. It's an old habit. They just do it. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to plan it. They just do it. And hopefully our termination in this context is where the student successfully passes their high school equivalency exam, is able to either go on to college or university or get to work. So keep in mind, I challenge you throughout this webinar to think of discipline problems as resistance to change. And this actually comes from a work by Dr. Bill Miller. He did his work here at UNM, and this is motivational interviewing. And these are 4 tips for responding to change. And this is a little acronym called OARS, O-A-R-S. So O is ask open-ended questions. A, provide affirmations. R, practice reflective listening. And S, summarize what the person has said. If you practice these 4 things, this is considered a good practice for dealing with resistance. What I was saying earlier about oftentimes discipline problems become a battle between the teacher and student. These tips are designed at creating a collaboration between the teacher and student. This is about getting on the same page and letting your student know, hey, we have a common goal. The common goal here is for you to pass the HSE. I, as a teacher, want to see my students succeed. This is how I can communicate to them, hey, we're on the same team. I want you to be successful. I'm going to try to show you the choices to make so that you can succeed. So let's look at the OARS in a little bit more detail. So open-ended questions. So I want to make the distinction between a closed-ended and an open-ended question. A closed-ended question usually elicits a yes or no answer. So if I say to a student, did you do your homework? They're probably either going to say, yes, I did, or no, I did not. And that is not a great way to get the conversation going. An open-ended question encourages dialogue. It's where you're creating that partnership where you're trying to get the student to have a discussion with you rather than just getting a simple yes or no answer for them. So instead of saying, did you do your homework? I might say, how did you do on your homework assignment? Much more vague there. That yes is not really an appropriate answer to that. No is not a really appropriate answer to that. The student's going to have to elaborate a little bit on it. And sometimes the first step to getting a student motivated is just get them comfortable talking to you. Just get them comfortable with the idea of interacting with you as a fellow human being. So let's try a couple. Again, I don't think I have anybody viewing us in a way that you can use the chat box. However, you can email jamie@nmdelt.org if you want to contribute to this. So what I want you to think of is how can you rephrase these questions so they're open-ended? So the first question, did you get enough sleep last night? Did you get enough sleep last night? I consider that an open-ended question because that may elicit a yes or no answer. So I'll give you just a few seconds to think about how could you restate that? Did you get enough sleep last night to elicit more of a response? So one way you could rephrase that as an open-ended question is to say, how did you sleep last night? I'm going to be talking a little bit later in today's webinar about the concept of not overwhelming students with questions. The best thing you can do from the perspective of motivation theory is to rephrase that as a statement. So how did you sleep last night is pretty good. That's going to open a dialogue. To say that as a statement, a way I could say that is, you look kind of tired today. Tell me about that. You look like you aren't well rested. Tell me what's going on. There I'm not overwhelming the student with questions. Another thing to think about, will you stop talking during my lesson? That's probably going to get a yes or a no. Hopefully it's a yes. The student really shouldn't be talking during your lesson. But we're trying to think of these kind of things as resistance to change. So think about that for a second. How could you rephrase that as an open-ended question? So a way that I might restate that, again, it's best to say it as a statement rather than a question. I may say that as, I need you to stop talking during my lesson. I need you to pay attention. That's giving a command. That's not asking a question. It's telling the student what to do. And keep in mind, some of these students may not know what to change. They may not know how to change. Right there, I'm telling the student, if you want to succeed, you cannot talk during my lesson. I need you to pay attention. Responding to resistance change. So remember the ORs. O was for open-ended question. A is for affirmations. This is where you may need to give some pep talks. I think students love pep talks. They respond quite well to them. Always encourage your student. Communicate that you believe they will succeed. Remember, you're trying to build a partnership to deal with the resistance to change. Always communicate high expectations. Expect great things of your students. It tends to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. If your student wants to be president of the United States, communicate to him. I bet you can do that if you work hard enough. Share appropriately about times you overcame challenges. I struggled in certain classes as I worked on my bachelor degree in mathematics. I remember abstract algebra was particularly difficult for me. I really struggled through that class. And I share with my students that sometimes. I tell them, I say, hey, I didn't learn this math overnight. I didn't come out of the womb knowing how to do algebra. I only got algebra because I worked so hard and I studied so much and I practiced a lot. Let the students know that you're human, within healthy boundaries, of course. Always have healthy boundaries with students. And share motivational videos. So New Mexico DELT, the distance education and learning technology, we're trying to expand the use of distance learning and technology throughout the state. And motivation can be particularly difficult in a distance education class. And I found it can be quite nice to have students watch videos about motivation in distance learning. Now, what I suggest is have the students write a couple of summaries about the video, so that way you can confirm that they actually watched it. If you don't have some sort of way to confirm they actually watched it, my experience is students will tend to blow it off. This is actually one of my favorite videos right here. This is Angela Lee Duckworth. And this is a video about grit. So it's about 6 minutes long. I'm just going to take a few minutes here and play it for you. It looks like it's going to open in my browser. Having some technical difficulties with my computer here today. Jamie, is the screen switching over to my browser?
Yes, it is.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll let this play. Let me know if there's problems with sound.
I will.
27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
So I just absolutely love that video. I show it to every single class that I teach every single semester. And I found that it's very, very powerful for students to see that. This idea that succeeding in school, succeeding in life is not necessarily about being the smartest, not necessarily about being the best looking, not necessarily about coming from the best family. It is about how hard are you willing to work. And there's so many videos like that out there. So if you do want to access that video, I'll have it in the reference section here on my presentation. The presentation will be posted to the NMDELT website, or you can just find it through YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and type in grit. It might be well worth your time to spend a little bit of your weekend looking through some motivational videos on YouTube. So just go to YouTube, type in motivation videos, and there's some really great ones out there. And I think they just mean so much to students. So that's one in particular that my students tend to just really love. So responding to resistance to change, keep in mind we're going through ORs. So we've had O for open-ended questions, A for affirmations, R for reflective listening. This is where you're seeking to understand the student's idea by offering it back to them. Here you're letting the student know you understand. So keep in mind, communication is a two-way process. Just because the student says something, you hear it, you interpret it. Your interpretation may not be what they really mean. This is your chance to make sure that you understand. You reconstruct what the person says and offer it back to them. So in a way, you're mirroring back what they said through your own understanding. You want to give your full attention when you do this. You don't want to be distracted. You don't want to be, trying to type on your email while you're talking to the student. None of that stuff. You want to give your full undivided attention to your student. Embrace the person's perspective. You may not agree with them, but you can try to understand where they're coming from. It's the concept of empathy. If you want to know more about empathy, I do have a student engagement webinar from a few months back on empathy. That's located on our NMDELT YouTube page. Try to embrace where they're coming from. It's that old saying of don't judge another person until you walk a mile in their shoes. You don't have to agree with them to listen and support them. It's about embracing the person as a whole, not just on their behaviors and their actions. Respond to their main points. So you do want to respond appropriately in ways that add to the dialogue, but you don't want to respond in a way that's going to digress to other subjects. You don't want to respond in a way that's going to take the conversation in a direction that the student didn't necessarily want to go. You want the student to have the power. This is about empowering our students to be better people, to be successful people. And finally, under ORs, there's summarize. Summarize, in a lot of ways, is similar to reflective listening. So remember what I said on reflective listening. What you think you understand may not be what the person intended to communicate. This also shows the person that you're paying attention. So what's the difference between reflective listening and summarizing? I think of reflective listening as something you do throughout the conversation. Reflective listening is a way to keep the conversation going. Summarizing is a way to wrap the conversation up. It's a way of telling the person, okay, so what I hear you saying is, and then give a summary of the discussion you just had. It lets the person know you were paying attention throughout. It lets the person know you were engaged throughout and that you value that student as a person. It's also confirming your understanding. So ORS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarizing. That's for motivational interviewing. If you want more information on motivational interviewing, there's a book titled Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick that is absolutely wonderful. I highly, highly, highly suggest it. You can also get on YouTube and find some talks by Dr. Miller free of charge that give more information on motivational interviewing. I find that it is very, very effective with students and all people in life. So continuing thinking motivation, why is a student not succeeding in your class? Always remember Maslow's hierarchy. You may not have seen this since you're an undergraduate, but it's so very important. So the physiological, do they have their basic necessities? Security, does the person feel safe? Love and belonging, does the student have a support system? Esteem, does the student believe in themselves? Do they believe that they're actually capable of succeeding? And that leads to self-actualization. So let's look at what we can do as ABE teachers to move our students up along Maslow's hierarchy. So the lowest level, the physiological. This is where, as a teacher, I suggest that you have a knowledge of community resources, things like food stamps, housing assistance, Medicaid, things that a lot of our HSE students qualify for. Now, if you don't have a knowledge of community resources, it's okay. I just ask that you know where to look. So right here, this is the Human Services Department for the state of New Mexico, hsd.state.nm.us, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that just so you can show you their website. There we go. So the New Mexico Human Services Department, and right here, looking for assistance, looking for information. These are the two links you want to click on, and you can get a lot of information about what kind of assistance programs are out there for our students. So here you can see this is where you apply. This is where you can look at health coverage, child support. Sometimes I've even seen students successfully get on programs where they get financial support for babysitting, food assistance, the food stamps program, income support. They might be able to get a tiny bit of income from the state for attending the HSC program, having money to live on, and then building your future. Those are some really great resources as well. So again, that's hsd.state.nm.us. If in doubt, just go into Google and type in what you want to find here. So please bear with me, as it looks like my PowerPoint got off just a little. Oh no, there it is. So there's a link, hsd.state.nm.us. So moving up the pyramid in Maslow's hierarchy, this is safety for the student. Express a willingness to listen to any student that does not feel safe. If a student ever communicates to you that they don't feel safe, please try to stop whatever you're doing and listen to them. It's very, very important. A student is not going to succeed in your class if they don't feel safe in their general life. Maybe this is another time to refer them to resources. I've had students disclose to me that they're in a domestic violence relationship. This is where I want to let them know, hey, there's state resources that can help you if you want to get out. Sometimes a student will disclose to me that they don't feel safe in their neighborhood. This is where I can let them know, hey, have you applied for state resources that maybe could help with some housing? We have HUD and Section 8 available in this state. Well, there's a pretty long waiting list to get on those. At least you can get your student on the waiting list so they can get that much closer to being in an environment where they are safe. Love and belonging. Love is one of those things that you want to be careful with. Always remember boundaries. I find love and belonging in our context to be a support system. Does the student have a support system? Do they have support from their families? Do they have support from their friends? Do they have support from their coworkers? And this is where it might be good to have a knowledge of some of the community groups around your area. If there's any support groups, sometimes that can be things like AA, sometimes that can be things like NA, Narcotics Anonymous. They have a family member struggling with substance abuse, something like Al-Anon, to let the person know that they are not alone as a family member. Maybe the support groups are some sort of self-help group. A lot of those go on in communities. Maybe being aware of counseling resources. If you link a student to health insurance through the HSD link up above there, and the student's eligible for Medicaid, they would get access to counseling. You may even have counseling available through your institution. That's the kind of thing to ask your supervisor and colleagues about. Have an idea of clubs around your community. Maybe that's a place to get the student involved in something positive, and also religious institutions. Be careful with the religious institutions. You as an instructor never want to try and pressure a student into your own religious beliefs. It needs to be a religious institution that aligns with the student's own belief system. From there, we have esteem, and this is what our webinar is about. It's about watching your language so that you can encourage self-esteem, and I hope encourage self-management, self-regulation on the part of the student. Always make sure you're saying things that give the student the power in the classroom. And finally, that leads to self-actualization. This is where you hope, anyway, I think all educators hope, to inspire a love of lifelong learning within your self-student. Because this is what I believe will actually lead to the self-actualization. These are just a few ideas I have in terms of how you can help a student to self-actualize. You may have other ideas. You're just always trying to support the student into becoming the person that they want to be and that they dream to be. So how can you do this? Well, there's a few things you want to avoid. You want to avoid beginning questions with why. Why implies blame if it's the first thing out of your mouth. So from a motivation theory perspective, starting with why automatically makes the person defensive. If the person is defensive, they're not necessarily listening to you. They may be formulating a response to whatever you're saying. That's why you want to avoid why at the start of a sentence. So why weren't you here yesterday implies the student did something wrong. Might be better to try and phrase this into a sentence. Tell me why you weren't here yesterday. Again, trying to create a partnership. I noticed you weren't here yesterday. Is there anything I can do to help you get to class? That's opening a dialogue. That's creating that partnership that you want. Avoid using humor inappropriately. Remember, sarcasm is not universal. Some people get sarcasm, some people don't. Make sure if you're using humor that it's not humor that attacks anybody individually. Be careful, it's not humor that attacks elements of who a person is. You don't want to attack things like culture. You don't want to attack things like race. You don't want to attack things like religion. So if you're using humor, only use it appropriately. Avoid the word should. Should can be a dirty word in terms of a CBT, cognitive behavioral sort of perspective. Should implies obligation. You should be working on this material implies that the student is doing something wrong, and it's not giving the student a choice. It's not telling the student what to do either. You want to give the power over to their student. This is where it might be better to say, hey, I would really like to see you work on this material more. Maybe you say, I want to encourage you to spend more time on this material. It's telling the student what to do. It's helping give them a roadmap to success while giving them the power. And it's communicating to the student, it's up to you whether you work on this material more or not. I can't force you. And when in doubt, a good rule of thumb is to ask yourself, am I discussing this for my benefit or the student's benefit? Your students are not there to benefit you as a person. You're there to benefit the students. You're there to help them succeed. So if you ask yourself, am I doing this for my benefit or the student's benefit? If you think I'm saying or doing this for my own benefit, then keep it to yourself. That's not what you're there for. You want to have your own support system as a teacher. Don't get me wrong. It's very important to attend to your own self-care. However, the classroom is not the place to do that. That's the place to do that with your friends. That's the place to do that with your family. That's the place to do that in the community outings that you like to do and the activities that you enjoy. So please be careful and make that distinction. And remember, too many questions can be overwhelming. They'll make the person defensive. You don't want to just badger with questions. That's why it's better to try to make things into statements where possible. So when it comes to not overwhelming with questions, a rule of thumb I have is ask only one question for every 3 statements. So if you made 3 statements in a row, then you can ask a question. If you ask a question, do your best to make the next 3 things that come out of your mouth a statement rather than a question. Again, this is about, you don't want to overwhelm the student with questions. You don't want to feel, you don't want to make the student feel like they need to defend themselves. You want to have a discussion and a dialogue. So again, we're going to practice here. Feel free to email jamie@nmdelt.org if you would like to participate in this, as we don't have anyone within the chat feature this afternoon. So a good tip, it's often helpful to begin your sentence with I. I is taking ownership. It's kind of the opposite of you in a way. Whereas you is going to get the other person to be defensive. Saying I is taking ownership. It's taking control of the conversation. So again, why are you in this program? If you ask a student, why are you in this program? It implies they're doing something wrong. It implies that they need to defend their placement in ABE. Another way of saying that is, tell me why you're in this program. Maybe begin that sentence with I'm curious about why you're in this program. See how the student responds. Where were you last class? Again, there's a question. And don't get me wrong, questions still have their place. You just don't want to be badgering the student with question after question after question after question. Where were you last class? Maybe say, I missed you last class. Where were you? Again, I started with I. I came in a way that I'm taking ownership. That's encouraging the student to listen to what I have to say rather than being defensive. Why didn't you complete your homework? Maybe you say, I noticed that you didn't do your homework. Be sure and let me know if there's anything I can do to help you be more successful. Again, that's about creating the dialogue. It's about opening the conversation, getting the student to talk to you in a genuine way. If you want more information about how to be genuine with your students or what it means to be genuine with your students within Healthy Boundaries, that is one of our previous student engagement talks. Again, you can find that either through the NMDELT website or through the NMDELT YouTube page. Do you think your answer is correct? Why? My students get very frustrated with this in math class in particular. So oftentimes they can get a correct answer, but they can't explain why they think it's correct. And again, there's that question, why? If I say why, that implies that I think they're wrong. Well, maybe they're not necessarily wrong. So maybe you need to tell the question, I'd like you to explain to me why this is correct. That's letting the student know that I believe they're correct, and I might not believe they're correct. I might be using this as a process to get them to contradict themselves and see their own mistake. Because that's where some of the most meaningful learning takes place, is when the student can see their own mistake. And keep in mind, these rules don't just apply in conversations you're having face-to-face. These things also apply with distance learning, even more so with distance learning, I venture to say. The thing about distance learning is you're often communicating in a written word, be that through some sort of instant messenger, be that through some sort of email messaging system. The thing about it is the student can sit around and ruminate on an email that you sent. And sometimes your students do this. So you want to choose your words very carefully to make sure it's creating a partnership. You want to try to tell the student, hey, you can trust me. I'm here to help you succeed. Inclusion, a big motivating thing is make everyone feel welcome in your class. You don't want to exclude certain groups. You also don't want to dishonor your own beliefs and values. So you can respect diversity, respect that everyone's different, but still honor your own values and beliefs. A few tips I have on this is teach vocabulary where it's appropriate. You don't want to have what I call $10 words in your instructions. Instructions should be very simple, be very direct. If you're wanting to teach very large words for students to use, teach it as vocabulary. Do it where appropriate. Don't confuse in the instructions. Don't shame a student for struggling to learn your language. My understanding is in the old days of ESL, the teachers would say, oh, no English, or no languages other than English. You're bad if you use Spanish in class. Meet the student where they are. If they're struggling to learn your language, convey a willingness to help. Convey that you want to see the student succeed. It's about creating that partnership. Be aware of your own bias. If you think you have no biases, you're kidding yourself. Every single person has their own worldview. A worldview is the lens you use to view the world around you. And so be aware of what your own biases and prejudices are. You may still have them, but you need to be aware of them so you can be careful not to bring them into the classroom with you. Avoid heterosexism. This is one that I think a lot of people miss. Heterosexism would be if you ask a male student about their wife. You ask a male student about their wife, you're assuming the student is straight. Maybe ask the student about who they're married to. Maybe ask the student about their partner, choosing something a little more pronoun neutral, not assuming that the student is heterosexual. Remember that nonverbal gestures are not universal. In some cultures, eye contact is a sign of respect. In other cultures, eye contact is a sign of disrespect. That's where you have to be aware of your own worldview. If in your worldview, eye contact is respectful, you can't try to mold every student to be like you. They don't necessarily aspire to be you. Respect the person as an individual. You're here to help them succeed in their life with what they want to do, not impose your own values and desires upon them. And that is my next bullet point. Never tell someone about their own culture. You have to be very careful about this. You may have read a book about this person's culture. You may have seen a documentary about this person's culture on National Geographic. That does not mean you understand the person's culture. It means you've read a book or you've watched a documentary. That may give you a better understanding than the average person, but you can't assume that you know. You don't know that person's subjective experience. You don't know that that documentary or that book that you watched or read is accurate. You don't know that it was good information. You don't know if maybe the information is outdated. If in doubt, ask the person to tell you. Expressing a willingness to learn about another person's culture and background and identity is a very good way to create a partnership. It lets a student know you respect them as an individual. You want to know about them as an individual. So here are my references if you want to know more information about it. The second one there, that is a link to the TED Talk that I showed on grit. If you want more information on heterosexism, GLSEN is an excellent resource for it. Here is the Miller and Rolnick book, Motivational Interviewing, Preparing People for Change. I highly suggest that as a read if you want to know more about how to get your students motivated. The trans-theoretical model, that is the idea of change happening in stages. Here's their link if you want to know more about that model. This article down here, a few years old now, but still a really good article, talks about why is change scary? Why do people resist change? And then here's just the University of Michigan Center on Research for Learning and Teaching. Lots of valuable information there about diversity and inclusion. Great place to learn about cultures that are different than yours, although keeping in mind the student from that culture is your best resource about their own culture. And again, find us on the web. NMDELT has lots of information to share. Check us out at nmdelt.org, and you can also like us on Facebook. We also have our NMDELT YouTube page. The student engagement webinars are archived on there. We also have Tech Talk webinars archived on YouTube. Tech Talks typically happen the 4th week of every month. Student engagement talks the 2nd week of every month, and they are all webinars. Keep in mind, NMDELT also provides regional trainings related to things like Plato, and we also have our annual conference, which we actually just had last Friday. So I'm not going to ask for questions or comments because we don't have anything in the dialog box. Jamie, have you received anything via email that I need to address?
I have not.
Okay. Well, we are right at 4:29, so it looks like I kept you right up to the minute. Thank you for attending this New Mexico DELT webinar, and enjoy our beautiful March weather.